Hi there, and welcome back. My name is John, and I'm here to present another video about type 1 diabetes. Type 2 as well, but this one is predominantly focused on type 1. I've been a type 1 patient for 45 years. I've also run a diabetes center in northern New York and currently work as an emergency medicine physician. I love diabetes. I've learned a lot from it. I love helping people with diabetes. And the purpose of my creation of this video series is to help increase awareness, share ideas, share funny stories, share thoughts, really just to help get people a pat on the back and maybe a hint or two to help them along this journey. It is a lifelong journey, it is a lifestyle, and it's definitely something that we need to respect. So please, no medical advice here. If you hear something you like or might want to try, just talk to your provider. I will share many ideas that have worked very well for myself and some of my patients. That does not mean that you need to rush home and adjust your own therapies, but you may want to have that conversation with either your diabetes educator, your nutritionist, or your medical provider. So, we started this back in June. We've covered a lot of topics. I'm not going to waste your time going over what we've covered. I'll leave that to you. But today comes from a message I received from a viewer. They are having a lot of issues dealing with stubborn low blood sugars. Those of you with diabetes, including myself, we've dealt with these. They're a real pain in the ass. It's hard to get that blood sugar up. It doesn't make sense. It's very mentally frustrating. It causes stress and it's dangerous. And by the time you get that blood sugar up, most of us overstep and end up with a high glucose. So that bouncing back and forth, we know, can cause a lot of problems. Aside from feeling like a Mack truck hit you, it's definitely worth avoiding. So I appreciate this comment and this question, and I'm happy to cover it today. So today we're looking at the hidden causes of stubborn low sugars. There's a lot of them. It gets deep into the endocrine world, and I'm not going to bore you with that, nor would I even try to completely understand it all, but I would like to give you a brief overview of some of the more common causes. We'll dive into that with a little bit of depth, then we'll go over some of the more reasonable treatments and ways to avoid this. So, cause number one we've talked about before. This happens frequently. I've done this to myself numerous times, is insulin stacking. So I'm going to step away from my pump world and go to the multiple daily dose world of taking shots. So let's assume I'm taking a basal insulin like Lantus before bed, and I take my Humalog or Novolog before my meals. I base those doses on my blood sugar and what I'm eating, carbohydrate-wise. So when we stack insulin, maybe randomly in the middle of the day, I test and I find my sugar to be high. I've tested because I've been urinating more, I'm thirsty, maybe a little nauseous, just not feeling my prime. Sugar's high, so I take a little bit of extra Novolog based on that sugar. But I'm frustrated and I want it to hurry up and improve. So a little while later, I take more Novolog. Or maybe I repeat that a third time. What I'm doing here is I'm ignoring my active insulin time. Briefly explained, active insulin time is that period of time that insulin that I took at point 1 is active inside of me. So the pumps will subtract that from your next dose to help avoid insulin stacking. When we're doing our own injections, we often don't subtract that. As a result, the insulin levels in us increase, and then they all like to hit together and they hit hard. So our sugar drops. We may have a sugar of 40, but insulin on board or active insulin in the system still could be 4, 5, 6, 7 units, meaning you're 40 and you're doing this. So now you have to not only take carbohydrates to compensate for the low sugar of 40, but also to predict what those extra units that you still have in you are going to do. So the amount of carbs you need to treat that go up, and this causes a stubborn, severe low sugar. So that one's our own fault, and we'll talk about ways to avoid that. That's the number one cause. Number two, we've talked about this before, the body likes balance. The body likes to be in homeostasis or balance levels. When we talk about glucose, it's insulin and glucagon working together to balance the blood sugar levels throughout the day. Of course, in the type 1 world, we're controlling the insulin. So the liver is involved with the glucagon. Anything that interrupts the liver's response can cause an interruption in the body's natural response to a low sugar, and therefore a more severe or stubborn low sugar. This could be alcohol. This could be liver damage, from trauma, could be liver damage from infection, could be liver damage from alcohol. So any of those players can certainly get in there and cause issues. Number 3 would be things that increase our insulin sensitivity. So I know day to day how I respond to insulin, but every day is different, and a lot of things during our days can adjust how we respond to insulin. Stress is a big one. Post-illness, which is a stress to the body, can make you more sensitive to insulin. Activity will make you more sensitive to insulin. Any significant weight loss can increase your sensitivity to insulin. Different hormones involved, like the counter-regulatory hormones to help maintain that balance. If they're blunted or not working quite right, you can have more insulin sensitivity and more severe lows. So we get it from increased insulin sensitivity, decreased liver doing a damn job, and like we talked about, the insulin stacking. Another one on the outside, the insulin variability from the insulin that we take. So not all of these insulins are designed the same. Not all of them work the same. I'm not worried so much about the short-acting insulins here, the Novalogs and Humalogs and Fias. They're off the table right now, but your basal insulin, your long-acting insulin. So I mentioned in the beginning, in this scenario, I'm taking Lantus. Well, Lantus does not have a perfect steady state. In fact, none of the injectable basal insulins have a perfect steady state. And what I mean by that is you take your dose, and after, say, day 3, the level of insulin in your body is nice and flat. It doesn't have the variability. Now remember, our Humalog, Novolog, Fias, those all spike and cause a sugar drop. Hence why we take them before we eat carbohydrates. The basal insulins, we don't want that. We want a nice, flat level of insulin in the background of the body to keep our sugars in good control when fasting. That's why we use our fasting glucose to adjust the basal insulin levels. So if that medication has variability, variability in 2 different methods. How long does it last? They all like to say at least 24 hours. And that may or may not be true. And of course, everybody's different. And does it have any peaks? So Lantus does have a fair amount of variability where it will peak and oftentimes doesn't last as long as it should. So we may have a few days or weeks where it doesn't quite last as long as it should. I'm checking my fasting glucose when the Lantus levels in my body are pretty low. So my sugar is starting to rise, and what am I doing? I'm going to increase my Lantus dose because of that. So therefore, when we get to that peak from Lantus, and it's a mild peak, we're not talking Mount McKinley here, we're talking a nice hill, but that rise of Lantus may exceed my glucose and cause me to have a severe low sugar. Add a little mixture to it. What if that happens? Maybe I take my Lantus in the morning. That happens middle of the day. So now, say about 2 o'clock, I start to have a peak from my Lantus causing my sugar to drop. But you know what? At 10 o'clock, I was high. So I took more Novolog. And at 11:30, I hadn't quite come down as much. So I took more Novolog. And then at 12:30, I started to feel funky, and I figured, oh, I'm still high. I took more Novolog. So now I've stacked my quick-acting insulin right around the time the Lantus peak is going to drop my sugar. And then I get one hell of a low sugar with a lot of resistance to improvement, stubborn, and prolonged. So there's a lot of causes of this and some variability in the medications we're treating it with. And if our timing just isn't spot on, we can run into some serious troubles and some serious, I hate to say it, but almost self-induced stubborn low sugars. Another factor with your variability, and I encourage you with caution, experiment with this. You take your Lantus in your belly and you sit at your desk all day working. No big deal. You take it in your leg and you go for a walk or a run. Your absorption variability is going to change, and that insulin is going to work much better for you. Same with your fast-acting insulins. If you take your Humalog or Novolog in your arm and you go and lift weights, it's going to work much faster and more aggressively for you. So it's just something you need to take into account. I'm going to take 5 units of Humalog before I have lunch, but oh yeah, I was going to the gym before lunch. Maybe I need to use caution. And not only is it where you inject it and the absorption, but if you were working out and then you inject it in the leg or the arm, your absorption is going to increase. The working out, the running, the walking, the exercise will increase your blood flow. It increases your muscle sensitivity and eagerness to take up glucose, and it improves the circulation and effectiveness of the insulin that you take. So keep that in mind. I know the last thing you want right now is another thing to balance and juggle, but where you inject it, what type of insulin you're using, the variability of that insulin, time of day, combined with insulin stacking, combined with the liver's ability to respond to low glucose, combined with stress, post-illness, hormonal changes, all kinds of things that increase our own sensitivity, all part of the mathematical calculations that we need to do to plan our dosing appropriately and avoid these low sugars. Let's take a minute now and look a little bit more into the hormones, what I call the counter-regulatory or the anti-insulin hormones. So insulin's going to drop our sugar by having the cells absorb the glucose, keep the blood sugar ideally where it wants to be, not too low, but potentially cause a low. So insulin overdose obviously is a major cause of a low. But there's other hormones that kind of work against insulin. Cortisol, epinephrine, growth hormone. These are all part of the body's response, glucagon, part of the body's response to a low sugar to improve the sugar, get that balance back. And they're also involved in between the meals to kind of maintain that balance. So the levels and functionality of these counter-regulatory hormones need to be appropriately matched against the rapid-acting insulin we're taking for our meal versus our activities, and the basal insulin for between the meals, because these counter-regulatory hormones can really cause some issues. Let's look at some of them. Glucagon. This is a big one. We used to see this. We've talked about it numerous times. This is the body's initial response to a low blood sugar. Tells the liver to, hey, start dropping some sugar into the blood, get us feeling better. Comes out of the alpha cells. And for those of us with long-term type 1, our alpha cells probably aren't very good at it anymore. So our ability to respond appropriately to a low blood sugar will dissipate and can, especially if we've had a lot of frequent or severe low sugars, that ability can kind of decrease over time. Also, the liver making stored sugar is dependent on your nutrition status. So if for some reason you're malnourished, be it from other illness, you've been traveling around the world and not eating appropriately, anorexia nervosa, bulimia, all kinds of things that can cause you to be malnourished will limit your ability to release stored sugar only because you don't got it. Alcoholism would be another one. So what we need to keep in mind here is the glucagon is the body's first response, but for those of us with type 1, especially if we've had a lot of frequent and severe low glucoses, our ability to respond to the glucagon or even to make it is going to go down. So we're going to see a more severe blood glucose because now it's just us and the people helping us fighting the glucose as opposed to our body, us, and the people helping us. Okay? Another one that we see is the cortisol and the epinephrine. This is the adrenal system. These come out of the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex, more anatomy than you want to know. But if for whatever reason that's not working well, Addison's disease, pituitary issues, some thyroid issues, damage to the adrenals for whatever reason, that will cause a blunting of these counter-regulatory hormones. So these work with insulin resistance, storage of glucose, and if we lower them, our sensitivity increases, our low sugars become more severe, can be very stubborn, not necessarily more frequent, but again, you're taking out another line of the body's defense against low blood sugar. I don't want to say line of defense, I want to say another method of the body to maintain that balance. So glucagon, epinephrine, cortisol, growth hormones also involved. Those are the big ones. So long-term stress can have a real impact on the adrenal system, causing those hormones to be blunted, maybe not released as aggressively, or maybe our own response to them to be diminished. As a result, we see more frequent, more stubborn low sugars. Again, we see this with pituitary disease, Addison's disease, damage from trauma to the adrenals, a lot of frequent low sugars. Just like for the type 2 folks, we constantly have a high sugar in the pancreas. It's constantly trying to keep up. Our ability to keep up dissipates over time, just using it a lot. So for us type 1s, if we're constantly having a lot of severe low sugars, then these counter-regulatory hormones just start to lose it. And it's something we need to keep in mind. And one of those things, and we'll go over this when we talk about treatment, one of those things that you're going to work with your provider to try to figure out. But always keep that in the back of your mind that, hey, this is happening too much. I've made all the proper adjustments and it's still happening. I need to find out what's going on with my other hormones. There's a seasonal issue with glucose levels. So we see much more severe low sugars during the summertime. Tends to be more insulin sensitivity during the summertime for folks with type 1. We tend to be a little bit more active. Our growth hormones and our cortisol levels tend to go down, and those will lead to insulin sensitivity. In fact, if you look at the numbers, the basal insulins tend to reduce during summertime. Again, as you can tell, a lot of this is very individualistic. If your summer plan is to sit on the couch and watch TV versus winter you're playing hockey all the time, you may see a little bit of a different play out. But based on the average Joe, this is what we see. Wintertime, the growth hormone, the cortisols, they tend to go up. We tend to see more insulin resistance. We tend to see higher basal insulins during the wintertime. Really just something to keep in mind because, again, stacking your insulin in the winter might not have nearly as much of an effect as it does in the middle of July. So again, we've talked about diabetes balance. In fact, I remember a book when I was growing up showing the clown juggling the exercise, the insulin, and the diet, and how simple diabetes is to control. Well, there's about 17 more balls in there. They're lit on fire and they have sharp edges. And timing and the fact that the clown is dancing on top of another ball is really much better description of the balancing that we are trying to do. So let's talk about other things that we can do to prevent and treat this. What do we do when our hormones are failing or our insulin is stacking or one of these many causes is going on? How do we avoid that? Insulin stacking is self-explanatory. I'm a victim of this. It's my own damn fault. We need to be more patient. Okay? In some cases, I think maybe blood testing works better for this because you're not blood testing every 5 minutes. So if you check your sugar is high, you treat it with a dose of Humalog, you check in an hour, you're likely to see some improvement and not get frustrated. But if for whatever reason your glucose was on its way up and you don't see the improvement you expected, you may be tempted to take more. So please use caution. Keep in mind, what did I dose with an hour ago? Should I reduce my dose now? Should I just sit back and be patient? Patience is the biggest battle against the insulin stacking. As far as the basal insulins, the variability can be a pain in the butt. Like I said, the 24 hours and the little peaks that occur. Best way I find for this is, number one, there are different types of basal insulins. You may want to try a different type. The big ones are your Lantus, your Basilar, Tresiba, Toujeo. These tend to work a lot better. Sorry, I forgot Levemir in there. I find the Tresiba and Levemir to be excellent. Much better flatline, much more regular 24-hour coverage. In fact, the Tresiba tends to be a little longer than that. Toujeo also tends to run a little longer. So it may be a trial and error that you need to work with your provider to find out which basal works best for you. If by cost or by insurance demand you're stuck with Lantus, and this has happened to many of my patients, what we will do is split the dose. So now instead of getting a hill in the middle of the day or the middle of the night, you're getting two smaller hills and you tend to stay a little flatter. If you look, it's hard to show you, I kind of need to get a whiteboard for these. If you look at a 24-hour period, you take your Lantus here and it starts working, okay? And then over time it comes down and ends here. Well, you have a period as this Lantus starts to work where there's not much insulin in the system, or the variability shortens it and there's even less insulin, or it lengthens it and now there's more insulin. It's one of the variability things you have to deal with. So 2 doses will eliminate that. So a lot of people do better with that. They have to reduce their basal insulin depending on time of year, depending on activities, based on fasting glucose. But if they split the dose, they tend to do a lot better. So that's one idea. Talking about your hormone balance, you get to the fact that you haven't had illness, your stress levels are controlled, your liver's in good shape. Talk to your provider, be it your primary care provider, your endocrinologist, maybe get some thyroid studies, see what's going on with the other hormones in the cascade, and this is where endocrine becomes incredibly complicated. So these are the folks you want to work with to make sure that your adrenals are responding appropriately, that your pituitary is giving the right messages, that your thyroid stimulating hormone and your free T4 and free T3 are all doing what they should be doing, because all of these hormones work together in a giant web and can have a significant impact on themselves. Have the liver evaluated while you're at it, and maybe get an ultrasound of the liver, check some liver functions, make sure you're not having any liver issues, be it from life in general, alcoholism, various forms of hepatitis, trauma. Did something ding your liver where your ability to respond with the counter-regulatory hormone of glucagon is diminished. So that's just something you need to work with your provider for. You all know my personal favorite, and I plug it every chance I get. The sensors, the continuous glucose monitoring systems, they provide you a wealth of information. It's important not because I get a number on my phone or on my pump or what have you, but I get a trend. I get to see where that glucose is going. You know, the fact that I blood test and see that my blood sugar is 100 means nothing. When I look at the trend and see that it's climbing, or even worse, dropping. So if I see that I'm 100 and there's some indication on the pump or the phone saying, hey, you know, you've dropped a lot in the last 10 minutes, I can treat earlier and avoid these problems, avoid these stubborn lows. My personal favorite is the whole system, like the 780G system with Medtronic, and I know there's some others out there, and I know there's a lot of work to completely close that loop and make everything work for everyone's benefit, but these systems have the ability to really reduce your severe, stubborn low sugars. I highly recommend it. The sensor gives you a wealth of information. The trend is what's important, not the number, but this is a great method to get a good hold on your low sugars. One key word for sensor coverage by insurance companies is hypoglycemic unawareness. So if you're talking to your provider, you know, I'm interested in the sensor, let them know. I have a hard time feeling my lows coming. I've had to call the paramedics, or almost had to call them. My neighbor had to come assist me. I had to go to the ER. These are all things that cost your insurance company a lot of money. They like to avoid that and rather pay for the sensor. So just one of those tricks that I learned fighting the insurance companies for 15 years. Never fun. But hypoglycemic unawareness can occur as the counter-regulatory hormone, especially epinephrine, gets blunted. So your early signs of a low may not occur anymore, and therefore you get a more severe low or a stubborn low. I experienced this for a while. My low symptoms were the same as my highs, which is a royal pain in the ass, you can imagine. I'd wake up incredibly thirsty and think, sheesh, my sugar must be through the roof. What did I do last night? And go and test, and I'm 40. It's like, huh? So I test again, and I'm still 40. So the body can play tricks on us. Pretty much I find with type 1 diabetes, once you get a good handle on it and feel comfortable, everything changes. So keep up that balancing act. I know it's difficult. I feel your pain. I've been there with you. Talk to your providers. Talk about the sensor. Talk about your symptoms. Investigate your timing of insulin, your stress levels, your liver status. Figure these things out, because that information can really guide you along this path. So again, thank you all for listening. I hope you got some helpful information out of this. To the viewer that posted the question, thank you very much. I hope this was helpful for you. There is a wealth of information out there about this, and it can be incredibly confusing. And certainly as a patient, I believe and know it is frustrating as hell. So please, everyone comment, like, subscribe. We'll keep these videos going and hopefully improve awareness, have a little bit of fun, and maybe give you a couple of hints that help you out. Thank you all very much, and as usual, stay healthy.